The story is inscribed on the walls and pillars of one of the temples of Ramses II. And it's quite possible and likely that some kind of surveillance has always been kept over Earth and the descendants of Adam, just in case. And this has been mainly performed in such a way as not to interfere directly with the development of our planet or the choice, though some chosen ones were aided by jinn. And the part that really interests us begins probably shortly before Solomon David's son became king of Israel. By the time this happened, several highly technological groups of jinn were firmly established on Earth. And these jinn could be classified basically into two main groups: those who were idolaters and those who worshiped the single God, who were called Muslim jinn, good Muslim jinn. Now, it seems somewhat surprising to find that Arabs call Muslim people who lived obviously long before Islamic era, including Kings David and Solomon, as well as many prophets of the Old Testament and even the jinn. Yet this mystery is even easily solved. And yet in one of the stories, an Arab is asked to explain the basis of this marvelous faith, Islam, requiring that the Islam is based on the great truth revealed to Arabs by the prophet, and that there is no other God except God. So if you think about it, according to this definition, it's evident that whoever understood this great truth, independently from the time when this happened, can be considered a Muslim. And from now on, we'll use this term as we describe Muslims. Believer in the one God. Now, these differentiated from the gods and lords of the planets and those who followed them under dominion and domination. And somehow King Solomon managed to sign a treaty with the Muslim part of the jinn, validating it with his seal. And even about 20 centuries later, when people met a jinn, they asked him whether he recognized the validity of Solomon's seal. And if the jinn answered affirmatively, he was considered a friend who could be trusted. Now, if he did not recognize the seal of Solomon and the free choice system, they were politely asked to continue on their way without interfering with people. And to describe an evil jinn, it was stated that he was a jinn of bad species, one of the rebels who believed in nothing and didn't recognize the supremacy of Solomon bin Daud. And in the 1001 Nights, Solomon is referred to as master of all jinn, a thing that is also present in the medieval sayings of the West. And according to tradition, Solomon allied his forces with demons and acquired magic powers from them. Of course, a highly technological civilization is that of the jinn, using firearms and aircraft of different types and matter transmutation and anti-gravity, and having a scientific knowledge of chemistry and matter structure as we cannot even begin to imagine with our present state of development, could transform a poor shepherd kingdom in the most brilliant kingdom on earth in a very short time. Think about it. Gold and wealth, of course, would have been no problem under such a system. The most outstanding and historically important event that happened under Solomon's rule, any reference to which have mysteriously disappeared from the Old Testament, was the war. A war in which he, together with his friend Domriat, ruler of the Muslim jinn, destroyed the might of the Sea King, who was an idolater refusing to recognize that there was only one God and to accept Solomon as the prophet of God. And this war took place somewhere between the years 973 and 933 BC, while Solomon was king of Israel. And the defeated enemies escaped as they could, and many were pursued by the victorious army and destroyed during months after the end of the actual war. But some of them managed to hide where they could not be found, surviving and having a descendant. The descendants were considered as dangerous to the good Muslims. Well, unfortunately for our civilization, the kings who ruled Israel after Solomon were not considered by jinn as trustworthy, and all the wealth of the great kingdom on our planet disappeared very shortly after his death. One of the more important references to jinn in the Old Testament after Solomon is a story of how the prophet Elijah was taken alive to the sky on a fiery vehicle that rose in a whirlwind. It was obviously some rocket ship. This happened in the 9th century BC, and not long afterward the ancient Greek culture began its development. Greeks counted their years beginning with the first Olympic Games in the year 776 BC. But the actual development of their civilization started much earlier, before reaching the stage of being able to perform the Olympic Games. During this early period, Greeks worshipped anthropomorphic gods, human in shape, superhuman in powers, who lived on Olympus, the top of which was always covered with clouds. So why should we consider that these gods were a pure invention of the ancient Greeks? And why should we deny the possibility of their real existence? When Elijah went into the sky with a coach of horses of fire, it's been accepted as truth, because it's stated in the Old Testament, which is Christians have chosen to recognize. But when Zeus drove his coach across the skies, it has to be considered as a product of overexcited imagination, just because poor old Zeus happened to be worshipped as a pagan god and could not find a due place in the Bible. Well, if the Greek religion had survived and not the Christian, probably the story about Elijah would have been considered fiction, and that of Zeus as the holy truth. And some group of the defeated jinn of the Sea Kingdom and their allies could easily have sought out such a peaceful place as the top of Olympus to hide from their enemies who were searching all the air for them. Since they were idolaters, they had no objections to being worshipped themselves as gods by the Adamites who inhabited those places. And they could have lived in peace and been respected, using their technology to amuse themselves and also help from time to time the people who worshipped and obeyed them. Sound familiar? Well, the cult of Neptune, god of the sea, was probably a sad memory of their destroyed sea kingdom and its king, or maybe even some descendants of that king who were among them. Venus, born from the sea, could actually belong to the sea people. In similarity to the sons of God described in the Old Testament, they also found the daughters of men to be handsome. In this way, the great heroes of the Greek mythology were born. Many interesting things can be observed in that mythology if it's looked upon objectively, assuming that the described facts really happened. For example, the case of Icarus was probably an unfortunate result of some Adamite having seen the flying device used by the inhabitants of Olympus and wishing to make such a thing himself. And Pan helped the Greeks to win a battle just by making strange noises, causing panic, fear among their enemies. This can be explained assuming that Pan had some weapon that produced at the same time as audible sounds some fear-provoking subsonic waves. And these are only a few examples. The viewer can find themselves logical scientific explanations for the other stories here. The Romans accepted the Greek divinities without further questioning their origin, and it's uncertain whether they lived in such a close communication with their divine protectors as the Greeks did, but they worshiped them just as faithfully. And then came the fall of Rome, some of the darkest times in all of recorded history, the mysterious and awe-inspiring Middle Ages. It was also a sad page in the history of Christendom, and when all progress in sciences had been opposed intentionally and eradicated because of an obscure interpretation of the Christian doctrines. And on the other hand, in Arabic countries, a new religion began to strengthen itself after the Hijra in 622 AD with the advent of the Prophet, who explained to Arabs the great truth that there is only one God, the same truth for which Solomon had fought so many centuries ago. After the expansion of the Islamic faith, great empires and dynasties thrived in the Middle East. And these are precisely the times that we encounter most frequently among the stories of the 1001 Nights. Jinn were present on Earth in different ways, according to their geographical locations. Where there were many Adamites, they preferred to stay out of the way. Well, in other countries having other religions, men also studied the alien sciences, becoming great warlocks, particularly among the Jews, Norbergens from South Africa and West Africa, and Persians. But since there weren't Muslims, their knowledge, though often admirers, would have feared, being considered as evil sorcery and contrary to God's laws, which was particularly true about alchemy, a study that no decent Muslim would ever try. And there were also forbidden places where jinn lived freely, no Adamite could ever approach. These were usually regions and places different from Earthmen, different, very inaccessible. Such places can be considered as sort of vacation sites for jinn, where some of them lived as they liked. And many of these forbidden places had the means to reach the planets of the jinn by means completely unknown even to our present science and civilization, either by space warping or through matter transmutation. They reached different dimensions or planets by these means, evidently. And as early as during the Umayyad dynasty, between the years 661 and 750 AD, one of the Umayyad rulers ordered an expedition to the forbidden city of Arian, the former domain of the Sea King, the one who did not want to recognize Solomon's supremacy. And on their way, they found many strange things and places that were the remnants of the great kingdoms, the very memory of which had been wiped out long ago. So how many of these places are still there, buried under the sands of the African deserts, just as the legends tell us? And after the Umayyad dynasty, there came the Abbasid dynasty with the famous Harun al-Rashid, who died in the year 193 of the Hijra, or 815 AD, and many extraordinary events took place during his kingdom.